Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name's Tara Vance, and I'm the CEO of Neuroclastic, and I'm with Kate Jones. We'll introduce ourselves in a second. Quick note to let everyone know, excuse me, that you have live captions for this presentation. You can use the toggle captions on and off button underneath the presentation video window if you want to see the captions or turn them off. Okay, so my name is Tara Vance. I'm the CEO of Neuroclastic. We are an actually autistic nonprofit organization that you can find us at neuroclastic.com or Neuroclastic on any social media. And we have over 500 autistic contributors, and we grow every day. And we publish resources and information for parents and service providers, autistic people, and perspectives from autistic people all over the world. So feel free to check us out after the conference and continue your journey of learning from autistic people, because that's going to be a very different paradigm compared to what you're used to. And today we're going to be moving quickly because this is a big one, and we hope to break your brains. Neuroclastic translates to neuro meaning nerves or strings, and clastic meaning breaking. So we want to break your harmful thought patterns, your stereotypes, and your worldview, and then show you a better way. So that is what we're doing today. And I will turn it over to Kate to introduce herself.
Thanks, Tara. My name's Kate Jones. I'm a psychotherapist, and I'm also a member of the team at Neuroclastic, where I do a range of things, but perhaps the thing that people most associate with me is illustration and creating visual languages for some of the things we publish, like articles and memes and social media posts.
Okay, so we're going to jump right in today. Brace yourself, because this is going to be a lot of material in this span of time. Put your questions that you have for us in the chat, and they will filter them to us, and we'll be answering them as we can throughout the presentation. And if there's time at the end, we'll answer some more. And then after the presentation, we will put up some post-publication material that you'll be able to view after the conference if we don't get to your questions today. Okay, we're going to talk about empathy, which is one of society's highest values. And everyone generally feels very positively about empathy, but autistic people have been, for a long time, painted as having disordered or lacking empathy. Sometimes that's divided into different types of empathy, saying that we have a lot of affective empathy, which means that we feel intensely, but we have disordered cognitive empathy, which is that we do not understand how to respond or what to do with that. And we're going to challenge that with a different way to conceive empathy. And these are some of the dictionary or popular definitions of empathy, because there are a lot of frameworks out there about how to conceive empathy. And I just want to read some of the things that we have in bold. Empathy is understanding or feeling what another person is experiencing within their frame of reference. Vicariously experiencing the feelings and thoughts and experiences of another person, past or present, without having them fully communicated in an objectively explicit manner. And the visceral experience of another person's thoughts and feelings from their point of view. Facilitates pro-social or helping behaviors that come from within so that people behave in a more compassionate manner. And looking at these, they're it's basically saying it's feeling in a psychic way, right? You are actually feeling another person's experiences vicariously. And that is not how empathy works. That's not how brains work. That's not humanity. So we're going to talk about the problems with the way empathy is conceived, but we can't do that until we talk about identity. So I'll turn it over to Kate for a second.
So identity is the unique position where a person is similar to or different from others in the intersectional social groups to which they belong. And those social groups and intersections could be country, race, religion, political party, family size, parental status, gender, language spoken, socioeconomic status, education, sexual orientation, disability, carer status, neighborhood, ethnicity. And this isn't an exhaustive list, but just some of the components that can make up a person's identity.
Kate drew this. These are ways to show what that means. So this is one person, and you see this is a Latin person, a woman, an EMT, a spouse, middle class, Christian, heterosexual, and non-autistic. And these knobs and sliders are meant to show how much this specific individual identifies with all of these things. So mostly this person identifies with being an EMT. So that's very important to this person, and also highly important to them as that they are a Christian. And so that makes up a core part of their identity. And we want to posit that autistic people's identity an autistic person's identity does not look like this. This is how identity is defined, but we believe, and there's an article on Neuroclassic that goes into depth about this, but we believe that an autistic person's identity, and this is the core difference between an autistic person and a non-autistic person, is that their identity is more driven by their interests and passions, their experiences, and their values. And that's not to say that autistic people don't have individual identities, or that non-autistic people don't have passions and values and experiences, but it's to say that we are more self-defined by our values and experiences compared to other people are more self-defined in the way that scholarly consensus agrees by their social intersections. And so an autistic person can be Latin or Christian or a spouse, But those things probably won't be as defining in the way they see themselves compared to a non-autistic person. So keep that in mind. And that's a that's a big thing to learn in 60 seconds or however long we explain that. But it has a huge impact on how we interact with the world. So we often find ourselves at odds with people in our same identity intersections, and they often believe that our challenges to something, there are a lot of autistic people of faith who belong to a religion who have been kicked out of their local church or synagogue or mosque, or a lot of people who have been challenged, a queer autistic person by the queer community, because they have challenged something specific, because their values matter to such an extreme extent. And people within that community feel that that challenge would diminish the health or the power of that collective identity. So if a Christian autistic person says, hey, I feel like the way we do this, the way we're doing something specific is contributing to oppression, or it's disrespectful to women, or it's homophobic, the people around them might see them as not Christian, or as being a traitor, basically. Why are you bringing this up? And so an autistic person finds themselves at odds with their collective identities all the time. This is the whole life of adult autistics and children too, but we're mostly going to talk about things that are more applicable to adults in this session. There are definitely extreme implications for children. We're going to ask you to kind of think about how that affects kids after the session. Just absorb as much as you can for today, and we'll make this slideshow and other materials available. Kate? I think we mostly covered this one, but.
Sure. So autistic identity is different. We can break that down to individual identity. So like all people, autistic people have individual identity intersections. Collective identity. We do not have as much connection to our collective identities as much as holistic people, which, as Tara was just explaining. And autistic identities are more contingent on passions, values, and experiences. So if we perceive that our values are at odds with the thing that we're particularly passionate about, that's likely to make us a bit of an outsider within the community that shares that that intersection with us. Would you say that's right?
Yes. Yeah. And we may have, in the prior example I used about a Christian person challenging something that their specific church or denomination is doing, that autistic person is often outcast, shunned, microaggressed against, but they might actually have the highest dedication to that their faith and their beliefs and values. And so it will be confusing to them that other people are challenging them. So what we're going to do today, the empathy, one of society's highest values, we're going to make the case that empathy is the politically correct mechanism that builds, maintains, and indefinitely proliferates oppression. And that is probably different from the way that you've conceived empathy before, but stay with us. We're going to, yeah. Also, Kate and I are very close friends, and we have a like an ongoing banter. So we laugh at each other a lot. And Kate has already agreed to just tell me to shut up, because this was originally my framework that I made way before I met Kate. And then Kate has helped me to refine and break down and illustrate all the many working components. So I will possibly take up too much space in this, and she might just tell me to stop talking, and that will be okay. So also, I don't have my camera on because this format is very hard for me. I have to have two devices going to be able to see the Zoom and this presentation at the same time, because I'm screen sharing. I can't see any of the comments or questions. And it's really hard for me to be on camera because I'm trying to monitor myself and stay on track. I often lose my words. So, as an accommodation for myself, I keep my camera off, and I appreciate you supporting me to deliver this conference in the way that I can without totally losing my place. Okay, Kate.
Okay, so reflexive empathy. It's an unconscious knee-jerk gut reaction. It's innate and involuntary. It's an emotional response to a direct stimulus that's familiar to us. For example, if you witness a person have an air horn go off beside their ear, you may reflexively wince, cover your ears. However, if you're totally deaf, profoundly deaf, the same stimulus would not elicit the same response to you, because you might have no frame of reference for how that feels. So you might have a different sensory experience of an air horn. Did anyone else yawn?
Yeah, so if you yawn too, that's a reflexive, that's your reflexive empathy. And looking at this image, there are some of you who feel much more reflexive empathy for this person than others, because you have a frame of reference of what this person might be going through in a millisecond after this image was taken. And others don't. So some people will feel a lot more reflexive empathy for this person. And this is an evolving framework, right? So to have the next tier of empathy, you have to have the one before too. So if you have relational empathy, you also have reflexive empathy. And we're going to show you how to get to that top tier. So these are progressive forms of empathy. Kate?
Yeah. Relational empathy is a semi-conscious emotional reaction that's innate and involuntary. However, the intensity of the reaction is felt based on how much a person relates to the other. So, for example, if we were to tell you about a worker in Oslo in Norway stabbing his boss after an altercation, you would likely not lose as much sleep or even be interested in the story as if your empathic response would be quite different if the same story happened in your place of work or your child's school, or somewhat a specific location or geography that is known to you.
So there is your, this is relational because it's how much it's related to you. If I told you Mildred died, that you're probably not going to lose a lot of sleep over Mildred because you have no idea who it is. And that's just a name. No one actually died. That's just an example. But you would need more context that's related to you to feel relational empathy. Now, if I told you a big long story about how Mildred was a service dog for someone, and I just really packed in the details of what Mildred did, and she died trying to save her person that she was supporting's life, that would cause you to feel a lot more relational empathy because you have more context that you could relate to. Now, if you knew Mildred, of course, or if you had a service dog that was extremely loyal and impactful and made a huge difference and you loved, than someone else's service dog, because you know how that feels. You've been there. You can relate a lot more, and that will be a lot more emotional to you. So that's what relational empathy is. And this is a brief clip. So who do you think feels the most relational empathy seeing this video? And of course, it's going to be people who have a loved one who's been deployed and you've worried. You know what it feels like to live without this person that you love, depend on, care about, and worry about their life, right? Worry that something bad could happen to them every day. And so that would be a lot more emotional to you than someone who, and you can empathize a lot more, and than someone who's not ever been in that position before, who's not ever had a loved one who's very close to them be deployed. Kate?
Protective empathy is a semi-conscious emotional reaction that is innate and involuntary and describes the instinctive empathy to protect those for whom we have the most relational empathy. A father may willingly run into a burning building to save his son. However, he is less likely to run into that same building to save someone he's never met. Protective empathy keeps him alive to care for his family. It has a function.
Right. So with this protective empathy, you are moving from just a reflex, right? Reflexively, if it's your child, your protective empathy is going to kick in. And before I was a parent, I took a lot of risks that I would not take now, financial risks. I'm a person who takes a lot of moonshots, go big or go home personality. But now that I have a child, I have to live very differently. So I've been an activist for 23 years now, since 1998. That is a really long time to be an activist. It is not usually a long career for people, because you have to take a lot of risks and it's very emotional. But I have to do things so much differently now that I have a child because of protective empathy. It's and it's logical, right? That you would want to, that you need to take care of people in your immediate surroundings.
From an evolutional point of view, you're wired to kind of ensure the survival of your people.
So when this video plays, this short clip, everyone is probably feeling a degree of protective empathy. And I want to challenge you to say to yourself, to think, who is your empathy protecting right now? Is it protecting this person? Is it protecting law enforcement? Is it protecting you? Because in this audience, even if everyone's protective empathy is engaged right now, some of you are protecting, you're having an urge to protect different people. And think about the implications of that. So everyone is feeling some empathy, but who are you feeling empathy for? Kate?
Reflexive, relational, and protective empathy are innate and instinctual. And thanks.
Sorry, I don't know how to make this little bar go away. It goes away on its own sometimes.
Can you stop wiggling your thing over my words?
My bad.
The intensity of innate empathy is increased or decreased based on how deeply we relate to a person or group of people. It's completely natural that we feel more strongly for our family, our co-workers and friends, and that we go to greater lengths to protect and accommodate those people. That's how we're wired. Tara. However, these forms of empathy have tremendous potential to cause harm, to work against the greater good, and to impede progress. When those in positions of power operate from the empathic instinct to identify and relate to the most like them, they subconsciously contribute to the power imbalance which keeps marginalized people from ever gaining parity.
Okay, so what we're saying now is that empathy for non-autistic people, for most people, all people have innate forms of empathy. All people, autistic or not, have varying degrees of empathy. We were talking about, Kate and I were talking about our daughters and how extremely empathic they are. My daughter, probably the most destroyed I have ever seen her and just wrecked was when she watched a video about Elmo, the Sesame Street puppet, losing his blanket, his security object. That's how important her security object is, a blanket. And so when he lost his, she just could not stand that he was going to be hurting so much because he lost his safety. And so, you know, Elmo on the screen is just had a moment of sadness and moved on. But my daughter, it was like 2 hours. I felt so terrible, but that's just how deeply she empathizes. And some people would feel nothing. You know, a lot of autistic people cannot even watch television at all, or the news or commercials, because they have such extreme reflexive empathy and protective empathy. But if your identity, the way that you relate to others, is more based on passions and interests, and experiences, and you're autistic, you are forever the underdog as an autistic person. And so autistic people as a community, and before I say this, I need to say, we are not speaking for all autistic people. Kate and I spend a lot of time, years, working with autistic people. I was a teacher for 14 years, largely teaching autistic students. I am autistic. And then I was a trauma counselor, largely with autistic clients. And then now I spend, I don't know, an average of 15 hours a day in the autistic community. So I have a really good idea of what autistic people think and feel about things generally, but we're speaking to the cumulative experience, and that does not mean that every single autistic person experiences things the way that we're saying. We're speaking generally, so that's important. And also, every non-autistic person is not going to be the same either, and so please just know that these are generalizations. But back to what I was saying, if I can remember it, hopefully if I start talking, it will come back. Nope, it's gone all the way. Sorry. Do you remember, Kate, where I was going before I interrupted my own self? Oh no, did we lose Kate? Kate is muted.
No, she's just got attention differences. So you were talking about you were talking about your daughter and how she had that really strong response to empathizing with someone losing their security blanket.
Right. And then I went on to how all
Marginal autistic people.
Oh, we root for the underdog. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we have experienced so much isolation and bullying and just these messages from society of always being not enough or too much. And so instead of empathizing with their social intersections like most people tend to do, we tend to empathize with the underdog because we have been the underdog. That's our value. And we tend to have a very strong sense of justice. And so people whose social intersections are, quote, winning, and you might think of a recent American president who's always talking about winning. And you can think of how that might have ramped up some unhealthy empathy in his crowd base. And so a lot of people do everything they can to stay winning, and they win all the time because they want to protect the health of their social intersections. And so they make decisions based on their empathy, and their empathy advantages the people most like them, that they most identify with based on their collective social identity. Whereas autistic people are empathizing with often the underdog. Do we have any questions before we move to the next slide?
Not that I can see so far.
Okay. Kate, you want to?
Yeah, so who benefits and who loses when innate empathy causes us to root for those who might look most like us, share our interests, have the same religion, live in the same neighborhoods, have the same socioeconomic status, same educational background, vote the same way, are of the same race, and are of similar ability profile? If that's what we're looking for, and we can only see the world as they see it through their lens, through our own lens, who will benefit?
And this is why things don't change, right? Because we are subconsciously, innately, and when I say we, I mean the majority of people, not autistic people. We're a very tiny minority, neuro minority to the neuro majority. But most people are subconsciously advantaging people who are most like them. And they're not always aware of this. They might actually have values that are extremely progressive. They might feel and believe that they are anti-racist or anti-bigotry. But are they able to identify and override their empathic responses so that they are not subconsciously proliferating injustice? And when I do another autistic note, sometimes it might seem like autistic people are making dramatic pauses a lot. I do that. That is not me being dramatic. That's me having a hard time finding my words or coordinating the movement to get them to come out. So it's really hard for us to modulate our speed when we speak, and we might be really loud or really quiet or really fast or take a long time and be really slow, and that's all neurological. So if you notice speech pattern differences and you're not super familiar with autistic people, those things are neurological and not on purpose, and we're not trying to be dramatic. It's just we can't help it.
So we do have a question.
Oh, good. What's that question?
So far, what you're defining as empathy seems like how sympathy is defined. For example, sympathy is for people and situations you understand, versus empathy is for things and people outside of your understanding. Can you expand on this? Thanks. I love this, just confused about terminology since it seems like you're talking about sympathy rather than empathy.
Well, we were talking about maybe putting in some positive things too, to illustrate so that this wouldn't be seen as sympathy only, like someone winning the lottery or getting an award, winning an election, getting a promotion on a job. The empathy is as defined at the beginning when we use the extremely popular sources like dictionary.com and Merriam-Webster, is more a feeling. Sympathy is feeling sadness for someone, whether you identify with them or not. And empathy is that, quote, putting yourself in their shoes. That's the most common way that people
yeah, we talk about it as the as if feeling, like the feeling it as if you were the other person.
Yes.
Sympathy is you're feeling yourself for somebody in response to somebody. Yeah.
And I want to talk about, and Kate can probably think of some really good examples too, of how non-autistic people cannot empathize with us at all. That maybe in some circumstances are universal. You know, we all have that reflex of empathy. If a cast iron skillet drops on your foot, everyone can imagine that really hurts and feel some reflex of empathy about that. And everyone can imagine what it's going to be like to heal from that. That doesn't matter if you're autistic or not. But there are a lot of things that non-autistic people do and think because they believe they know how we feel, what we want them to say in response, that are actually not helpful to us, may cause harm because they really can't identify with us. When I look at someone giving another person a hug without asking first, you know, and they just reconnect, or, you know, you're sitting in a cafe and someone's sitting there and a friend comes in and they hug. My gut empathy, my reflex of empathy is to feel like that person has been attacked. It's not, logically, I know they probably both wanted to do that and they're smiling, but I have to smile when people hug me or I'm extremely rude, but that will feel like an assault to me. Sometimes when a person is talking for a long time without giving the other person a break, that can feel like an assault to me when I witness it, because my living inside my brain is extremely different. So we all have, it's impossible to empathize with someone who's extremely different from you, whose life is extremely different. You can't know how they feel if you're not them and if you haven't experienced something. The closer you are to their identity intersections, the more you can know how it feels. If you are not queer, but you have a very good friend or an immediate family member who is, and you've seen them experience discrimination and you've been extremely upset by what they've gone through, you still don't know how it feels to be them, but you're closer to empathizing because of other identity intersections that you relate to, like being in the same family and loving that person, but you still can't know what it feels like to be a person who's lived a different experience with a different brain. So that's probably a lot more than you ask for and a little off topic. I apologize if that's the case. Kate, do you have any other examples?
I was wondering about that thing where people say, well, we're all, like you describe the experience of being autistic, and someone says, well, yeah, but you don't have to let it define you. And their intention, I think, in that moment is to tell you that you're okay with them and that they see you as an okay person. But what they haven't accounted for is that there's ableism in there. Your worldview is that disability or autism isn't okay, and so they're giving you a way out of it when you don't need one. And also, no, not everyone is actually a little bit autistic, and that they undermine your life experiences by telling you that, because what they're saying to you is, I'm trying to tell you you're not so different, when everything about your life experiences is how differently you have experienced the world and continue to.
Yes, thank you. How are we on time? Because I can't see any clocks from where I am.
I'll get Topher to give us a little time.
Because I have a lot more experience examples that 30 minutes. So cool. We need Thank you.
Get a wriggle on.
Yeah, let's get a wriggle on. You go ahead with that, Kate.
Okay. Logical empathy is a fully conscious and thoughtful form of empathy that involves using logic, reason, verifiable evidence, self-examination, and empirical facts to consciously override emotional bias. It's an altruistic form of empathy engaged in the interest of the greater good.
Okay, so these next few, the top 3 tiers of empathy take effort, right? They're not innate, they're not instinctual. This is the evolving part that we are asking people to consider and get on board with. So your logical empathy is a practice. It's a mind habit. An average mind takes about 3 months to form a new habit before it becomes automatic. And that time dramatically is different from person to person, but that's an average, right? So you you have to work at this kind of empathy. It's not it's not innate to you. And earlier I asked you who you were feeling protective empathy for with the video clip of the man holding the Black Lives Matter sign. And this is going to kind of bring that back. Kate, do you want to read this?
Sure. Allison is a Vietnam veteran who sees football players kneel in protest against police brutality during the national anthem. His son, a police officer, had to miss the game because he was called into an emergency situation. Allison feels that his identity is under attack. He has no conscious racism and doesn't believe that his son does either, but he taught his children better. Cue innate empathy.
Okay, so Ellison sees this. He has his innate empathy. And, you know, the football players kneeling, this is a several-year-old example. But imagining this is the first time Ellison has seen it. We use this example because most people know about it and have this shared context enough that that we wouldn't have to provide a lot of background. So Ellison has the national anthem as an emotional, and everyone standing together during that time as kind of an emotional thing to say that his social identities are being upheld as a veteran. Also, his son is a police officer, and he doesn't think his son is racist. He taught his kids better, so he might believe that or innately, his instinct is probably going to be defensive. Kate?
Yeah, so his innate empathy would cause Ellison to double down and form an us versus them duality, since he's got no conscious bias before. He's predisposed to viscerally reject the message without considering it, because he feels protective empathy from those who are most like him. Ellison starts to feel that the players are causing division. He only now senses. So that division that's been there the whole time, the racism that has been there the whole time, is only now within his awareness because it causes a visceral discomfort.
Yes. And since he personally has not, and when I say conscious, and when we say conscious bias, this doesn't mean that he's not racist. It means that he might not be aware of it, right? So, and being not racist is not the same thing as being anti-racist. And so Ellison might look at this and feel he's never heard his son say a racist thing, and his son's a cop. And he might feel, just as an instinct, a knee gut reaction, they're being divisive. They're causing division. That's not how things are. They're sounding the alarms, making a bigger deal out of things than they should be, or
he's never considered how he has played a part in upholding division before now.
Yes, because of his innate forms of empathy. Kate?
Because without conscious effort, empathy will preserve his identity as a veteran, as a father of an officer, and as a patriot, as defined by those in his social identity intersections. But Ellison engages in logical empathy. Ellison recognizes that he has innate bias that serves to protect him and those who occupy the same collective identities. So he takes time to pause, read, research, listen to the players, examine his emotional reactions to check for innate bias, and consider the broader perspective, which would allow him to preserve his respect for veterans and officers, while also respecting the need for accountability for the overuse of force. So he's checking himself.
Yes, his gut reaction could maintain harm, right? But he engages in logical empathy. He had that gut reaction. He wanted to protect his social identities, but then he takes pause. So if he lets all that richness of empathy that he feels for police officers and veterans coexist with the richness of empathy for people who are disproportionately marginalized, arrested, penalized, and brutalized by officers, what happens at that point? Empathy is not a finite resource, but his social intersections that have been enjoying and benefiting from the privilege of having the most power and the most access and the least oppression might start to crumble, right? Even if he doesn't hate officers, he can still hold them accountable. He can still love his son and believe in his son's goodness. But he will, if he starts to make changes, then that power structure is going to be less empowered. So giving that up instinctually is going to be hard for him because he is giving up the empathy, the protective empathy, the stronghold that he is unintentionally upheld. It's very hard. It's a lot of cognitive dissonance to break out of protective empathy. And he can still support campaigns against police brutality and racism without having that zero-sum thinking that if he admits the indisputable fact that that there is disproportionate brutality, arrests, misconduct towards people of color in America. If he admits that his social identity is going to be disempowered, right? And he needs to do that because it is for the greater good. So yeah, we move on to collaborative empathy. So we're still moving up. Ellison is not there yet. Kate?
Involves expanding logical empathy by consulting the interpretations, perspectives, and conclusions of those with different experiences and in different fields of expertise. This might mean joining social advocacy groups as an ally, seeking expert insight, and lending humble perspectives and experience to others.
I put an asterisk on experience because this does not mean telling people who do not belong to your social identity intersections how to do things. Lending experience might mean you're a painter and an artist, and you offer to use your expertise to help someone, to help another group advance their cause, right? So I don't mean telling people how to do things when we say lending your experience or your skills or your time. I mean doing what they need, not telling them what they need. Kate?
So, for example, a newly appointed mayor notes that previous attempts at reducing poverty in the city have failed. She engages in logical empathy, attending seminars, conducting research, and analysing previous efforts for citywide initiatives. As a gesture of collaborative empathy, she assembles a team of individuals with diversity of expertise, oversight, reach, and perspective to collaborate on joint endeavour and arrive at a more informed, comprehensive, collective experience.
Collaborative empathy leaves little room for uninformed opinion or innate bias to override decision making. So, what happens when you have collaborative empathy, again, is that these inequities begin to dissolve right? Because you are now making people stakeholders who haven't been stakeholders in their own destiny. You're making them decision makers. Whereas before, you've been, if you are in a position of privilege, you've been unintentionally allowing your empathy to maintain power imbalances, right? When you belong to identity intersections with more privilege than other people who do not belong to those same identity intersections, your innate empathy is probably unintentionally causing that power imbalance to just be indefinite.
Most importantly, once someone is engaged in collaborative empathy, then they've engaged in a neuroclastic process in the brain. They are now experiencing innate forms of empathy that are purely emotional because they now have a social identity as a co-conspirator and experience relational empathy with marginalized populations. They now experience protective empathy to want to preserve access rights and accommodations of their friends.
So, evolving your empathy, right? Learning, being logical, overriding your innate instincts, and engaging as a co-conspirator gives you a new social identity to protect. Now you are protecting, even though you're not in the same identity intersections with other people. Like in this instance, this mayor is not an impoverished person, presumably, but now she's a co-conspirator. She's not a savior, right? She is now listening to people, and she's now getting informed perspectives from others, other cities, and other initiatives that have been successful. And so now she has a new identity that causes her to feel this protective empathy for. And she is better positioned to empathize in ways that don't cause harm.
Tara, we have a question.
Okay.
As an autistic adult, I often find it difficult to go to this collaborative level. I engage in logical empathy all the time, but it often feels overwhelming to purposefully engage further collaboratively. Although I think it's a great thing to do. Do you have any thoughts about this?
Oh, yes, absolutely. You are, as an autistic person, you're having a hard time trying to engage in collaborative endeavors. It feels like trying to stick your hand in a fire because you know what's going to happen because you've done it 1,000 times and you have been hurt. And I'm presuming, because this is my experience and a lot of autistic people's experiences, you've been hurt, you've been spoken over, you've been dismissed, your ideas have been rejected because other people who are not autistic have engaged their innate forms of empathy and weaponized them against you. And so you can collaborate. If you look at neuroclastic, we don't have any deadlines. We're very different, all of us. There's never any pressure to do anything. We do not always work the same way as non-autistic people in collaboration, but that's totally okay. The way we do projects, doing them at the same time is not always, as a completely joint venture where we're both working on the same task at the same time. We have to break things down sometimes and do them differently. But autistic people very much, like you said, want to contribute to the greater good. But it's hard to get to this collaborative empathy point because other people, the majority, have to also be there. And so what I would say my thoughts are is that you have demonstrated why this is important, right? You want to help. It's important to you. And other people have not made that accessible because their innate forms of empathy have caused problems for you. And I think this slide kind of addresses that. With collaborative empathy, identity depends on destroying power differentials instead of maintaining them. And now you're on your way to understanding autistic identity and empathy. So you've been there probably already, right? If you're autistic, your identity and empathy is different. You root for the underdog, but other people don't. Even if they do, they often subconsciously cause problems for the underdog. You do things differently, and that goes against their innate empathy, right? So we have one more tier of empathy, and then we'll try and get some questions if we have time.
Actionable empathy. It involves mobilizing the perspective gained from logical and collaborative empathy to actively participate in advancing the greater good. It's an emotional empathy, which is thoughtfully informed by logic, enhanced by a consciously broadened collective perception, which promotes social justice. Now we engage in a neuroplastic reinforcer of gaining emotional gratification by seeing progress happen. We have engaged our participation and invested in something, so our brains begin to shift to seeing our identity as one of being a cog in a machine that destroys the power imbalances, erases injustices, and dismantles barriers. We rewire our brains with conscious action, forming new thought habits by will.
So eventually, these thoughtful, purposeful forms of empathy become your new innate, right? Now, instead of subconsciously working against people who do not belong to your same identity intersections, now your instinct eventually becomes to destroy those power imbalances, right, that you have contributed to.
So, reactional empathy versus actionable empathy. Reactional empathy is instinctively choosing to reward or punish, invest or divest, include or exclude, or validate or invalidate a person or identity group based on emotional relatedness or otherness, respectively. This often leads to misallocation or misappropriation of resources or blame. Actionable empathy is removing personal bias and reducing the potential for negative outcomes by relying on the collective wisdom and perspective of others. It removes the power differential, which maintains a dependence paradigm and moves society to a model of interdependence.
So, with your purposeful empathy, you are proactively seeking to implement the right solutions given the circumstances. You cannot just rely on your innate empathy that you feel you are so just born with, and you are amazing for having all this empathy that you feel. You can't just keep doing that. It saves time and resources because you apply the right effort in the right places to achieve the right results. As a teacher, we would spend literal millions of dollars as a district engaging in these citywide initiatives, like from the Southern Poverty Law Center. But they never went anywhere because people's innate empathy was sabotage. They subconsciously sabotaged efforts to do the right things. So this presentation, this information, this framework can help you be more primed to do the right things without just spending all this money as a savior from the top, making decisions about what people need. Even if it is what they need, you have to have everyone else working together, right, to help make that happen, to be collaborative. And so we need people to engage in actionable empathy. Diminishes the interpersonal gaps between people who are different by fostering joint collaboration. Once you build those relationships, you don't, like a parent of a child, like an autism mom, right? You become a lot more, you empathize a lot more in things related to autism once someone autistic is in your life. But until you're collaborating with us, you're probably causing us a lot of harm. And I will say, you likely are causing us a lot of harm unless you're collaborating with us. Most of everything in the mainstream about autism, autistic people hate. They have a lot of problem with. We struggle so hard to get people to know that we exist, right? And they still shut us out. They still continue to platform Autism Speaks, but the autistic community has maintained for years it's a hate group. And so we are asking you to engage with us collaboratively. That doesn't mean to tell us what we need, but to hear us and help us get there, to destroy those power differentials, because we are capable of leading ourselves. It accelerates progress and encourages creative problem solving by diversifying sources of input. Kate?
Uses planning, research, and execution time by drawing on the current available knowledge and the precedents to avoid reinventing the wheel. It forges new connections so that empathy becomes an innately positive response to people who are different, and it fosters trust amongst collaborating stakeholders. Us versus them becomes us versus problem to be solved. Innate empathy fails because not only is it contingent on relative connections, but it also is reinforced by the people receiving the empathy showing compliance and gratitude. In other words, the empathy giver wants the receiver to be grateful and thankful and dependent on their mercy. Power imbalance of savior and dependent. When there is a power imbalance, the person who is demonstrating innate forms of empathy can't possibly empathize innately because they can't feel powerlessness when they're not powerless. They can't know what it's like to be pressed down under the weight of layers of oppressions.
And this is where we are as autistic people. We are kept in this power imbalance of savior and dependent. If you only hear about autism from parents of autistic people, not that they don't need to be heard as well, they are a stakeholder, but they are the ones on the stage. And from providers who often cause extreme harm to us with the way that they believe therapy should be approached and intervention. That's maintaining that power imbalance where you're a savior and we are just supposed to say thank you. And we don't, you hate us. And that happens. And we need you not to do that. We need you not to contribute that to that. We need you to become a co-conspirator with us. And not just us, but other marginalized populations as well.
Until we are conscious of biases and how empathy is self-serving, we can't begin to undo the potential damage our innate empathy might be causing. Purposeful empathy is difficult. It will separate you from your former identities. People from those groups will call you a traitor. You'll lose your safety net like an autistic person living in a world that can't possibly empathize with us. This is the true way to remove privilege, to give that up, that self-protecting empathy that advantages sameness.
Call it the tyranny of sameness.
Yeah.
Yeah, we need you to stop doing that. It's going to cause you to lose your people are going to call you a traitor, and maybe directly or indirectly. You'll start to experience the same exclusion that we do because you've consciously given up your social identity as a martyr, as a savior, to be a co-conspirator with us, to get on board with us. And I want to say that Penn State has done that. They have taken that risk. No one asked us what we're presenting. No one asked us what we're going to talk about. They gave us a stage and said, say what you need to say. How can we help you make it accessible so that you can do that?
And then they poured all of their privilege and support and resources into making it happen.
Yes. They didn't ask us for presentations ahead of time. They didn't police us. They were co-conspirators with us. And this conference is historic for several reasons, and that's a big one. Because we're usually over-policed and infantilized. Well, we didn't get that here. And we're asking the rest of the world to do the same thing because this is huge. Kate?
Academia it reinforces the power differential that upholds oppression by pathologizing true empathy.
Yeah. So go ahead, Kate. Sorry.
We are really short on time. I think we've just maybe got a couple of minutes left, but there are some questions. 2 minutes. Thanks, Topher.
So if you're in academia, stop asking us to prove ourselves. In that last presentation with Gregory and Brian, we saw some of you in the comments being colonizers. You were using your innate privilege and your academic privilege, and you were trying to undermine their voice by asking them. And you did that with fake names, so you had no accountability, and you have the privilege to do that. Is this your authentic? How can you prove this is your authentic communication? Don't do that to us. And if you see other people doing it, stop them. Tell them that's not okay.
And you did that on the one time on some of the most marginalized voices in our community were given a real stage, a real platform, and you still felt that it was your position to come into that space and say, prove yourself, without knowing anything about the level of energy it took those guys to find the regulation to do what they did, the level of courage, the work it took them, the years it took them to find their voice. And the one day they had a platform to speak to thousands of people and say, look, I'm here, I'm in here, presume my competence. You thought it was okay to come here and say, what do you think about facilitated communication, which they are not talking to you about.
Yeah. How can you prove that you're not being influenced by someone? Stop doing that. We're not asking for ASHA for the American Speech and Hearing. We're not asking for the BACB to endorse us. We're asking for co-conspirators, and we're asking other people to stand up with us and fight for us, that we don't need your permission to do what we do. We need you to help us. All right, let's take one question and then we will get to the rest of the questions. Here's our contact information. We'll get to the rest of the questions later.
As an autistic parent to an autistic son, please let me know how I can collaborate. This conference has been heart-opening for me so far. I quit my job to focus on advocacy for the autistic community and to ensure my son is seen, heard, and included. I would say listen to autistic adults. We're here, and we are so welcoming of you to help us and be co-conspirators. Tara, what would you say?
Same, contact us. We always need help.
Yes.
There's our emails. Use the contact form on Neuroclassic. we actually need help with with getting through the contact. We need a lot of help. Help us.
Yes.
Thank you for that. One more?
Overriding your innate instincts, but what if you don't have them? Lols. We feel
That is
you.
a great question. Good. Then you have nothing to override. You're halfway there already.
Doing the thing.
So we hope we broke your brain enough that you can now start some new thought habits. You have Ben Bro next, who is amazing. And Kate and I will be in the background. Kate's going to introduce Ben. And we thank you so much. We'll try to get to the rest of the questions. And we hope this was meaningful for you and that you will join us and that you will follow Penn State's example and be co-conspirators with us.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.